Hello everybody, and thank you very much this morning for coming along to listen to me this morning talk about the sportsbook market in the UK. My name is Jared Farrell. I am Principal Client Advisor, Lead Client Advisor for Global Reviews globally, and I look after the sportsbook market in the UK and in Ireland. So I know that we have a few people on the webinar this morning who are from the casino industry, and so we do run a casino program which is going into field in May. But just so we're clear, the results that we're going to be going through this morning are from the sportsbook industry, from research that we conducted in February, and then also I want to look at some longitudinal insights from research that was also conducted in December so that we can see the movement of numbers and we can see some things that have been happening. So thank you much for coming along. The way in which I'm going to structure this is I'm going to talk about global reviews towards the end. I'm going to start off with some insights at the very beginning, and then I'm going to talk about the methodology as we move through the session. So if you have any questions, I'm going to ask you to hold on to them until we get to the very end, and then if you could send them through in a chat, I will stop at the end for a minute, look at the questions, and then come back online and finish off by answering the questions and any queries that people may have. And my contact details are also at the very end of the presentation. If you would like a copy of the recording, this webinar is being recorded, or even the slides, please do just let me know. So let's get straight into it. So in terms of the different things that I'm going to talk about this morning, the brands that I'm going to be talking about for this particular study are on screen in front of you at the moment. And they are the ones that you will know very well, the household brand names when it comes to sportsbook market in the UK and in Ireland. And so the different things that I'm going to be looking at for these particular brands is who's winning and losing at the marketing discovery stage. Now, because this research was conducted towards the end of February and just before Cheltenham, I think that the research that we have both from the marketing side and the sales side, so the digital sales platform side, gives a very good indication of the state of play of where these different brands were just before Cheltenham. So from that point of view, some of the results are going to be very interesting. And then the other thing that we're going to be doing today is we're looking at the marketing piece before people get to your website, and then we're going to be looking at the actual on-website experience and how that ultimately is driving conversion, both for if you're a client of a member of one of these brands, so your own scores within our program, but then also the scores of your competitors. So what do customers want from a sports betting provider? We're going to look at that. The importance of website in driving final preference, and when I say final preference, that means that we make a decision from multiple brands that we can choose from to one brand that really gets us over the line, the final place where we place the bet. Who is performing well at the betting slip and who can do more to support the customer? And then finally, what would punters do if they encountered a problem? So we're talking about support, and we're talking about the contextual element of support at the betting slip in comparison to the registration page, in comparison to looking at in-play event options. How do we support the customer at those different stages as they're moving through the journey? So there are some of the things that we're going to be talking about this morning. So just to give you an understanding of how I'm going to run through the insights, it is helpful at this point to introduce what is the Global Reviews proprietary funnel. So this is what we have developed and what is the bedrock of all of our research, and it essentially is the consumer-centric element of the research. So the idea being that this is the pathway that a consumer will take within the sportsbook market. We also apply this pathway to all of the other industries in which we operate, of which there are many. And so that we can then use this consumer centricity to build out the product set which is required in order to measure the customer journey. So what we're going to be looking at first this morning is the discover stage, which is really about the how easy is it for customers to find you and how attractive are you to customers considering what they're trying to do in the journey that they're moving through. The second step then is the consider phase, which is really about the repertoire. They're looking around at the different options that are available to them, they're shopping around, and they're considering their options. So how are you supporting them and promoting yourselves during that phase? And then the third step is the act phase, and this is really where we're looking to place a bet, or we may be looking to register with the actual sportsbook. provider. And so I'm going to stop in this particular presentation and webinar. I'm going to stop at the act stage. I'm not going to go into the relate stage, but the relate stage is really about the behind the login area, member services in other industries. How are we supporting self-service and discoverability as they're trying to move through that journey of looking after themselves? Because more and more retention is now becoming a key issue in all industries, because obviously it is more expensive to recruit than it is to retain. Okay, so getting straight into it, without talking about methodology, looking straight away at some scores. The concept of initial preference is essentially right now thinking of the brands that you can think of in the marketplace. Who would you consider placing a bet with if you were going to place a bet right now? And so what we can see, led by halo scores, brand halo scores, so the idea being the top of mind brand awareness, we can see that from two different periods of time, from December 2015 through to February 2016, William Hill and Paddy Power have seen a significant increase in terms of the number of people who would choose them at initial preference, not having done any online research or anything like that. We can see that Ladbrokes have seen a significant drop. We can see that Betfair have seen an increase, and then we can see some of the other scores across some of the other brands. So what I wanted to do here, first of all, was I wanted to look at who are the top 4 providers in terms of, in the customer's mind, who they would actually choose as a sports book provider to place their bet. Now, this is at the very beginning of that journey in terms of looking at the different options that are available to them. So in each individual run of data, we're looking at a sample size of 200. So across these two, we're looking at a sample size of 400. But the key thing is that all of the people who are involved in this study are in market and are looking to place a bet within the next 90 days and have recently placed a bet online. So in the last 90 days, they have placed a bet online. So these are active regular bettors. Okay, so we've got a key message here that's coming out, William Hill and Paddy Power, but really what I want to look at is I want to look at the top 4 providers, really. So some of the results that we're going to see from here on in focus specifically on William Hill, Paddy Power, Ladbrokes and Betfair. And please bear in mind that story about William Hill increasing initial engagement and Paddy Power increasing initial preference as well. Sorry, initial preference, not initial engagement. Okay, so when we asked them about the brand that you would choose as your initial preference, we asked them why. And so I can drill down to an individual brand level on this, but I don't want to do that. I want to look at an aggregated macro level at the moment to try and understand if there's a general industry trend that is driving the change in brand preference, so the uplift for some and the drop in others. And so what I can see is that there actually isn't a significant change between the two different periods of time on the reasons why that they may choose a brand at the initial preference stage. And I can see also that a key thing is brand relationship. I'm a current customer, I've used them before, and I trust this company. So before they do any research online, and we asked them about thinking of the brands that you can think of in the marketplace today, who would you choose to place a bet with amongst active bettors? And brand trust and brand relationship is really important. On the right-hand side, we asked those who can think of a brand and who cannot or don't choose a particular brand for their where they would place a bet. So to give you an example of what I mean, so think of the brands that you can think of in the marketplace, and of those brands that you can think of, who would you place an initial bet with? Not everybody will actually choose a brand that they would place a bet with. Some decide that actually, you know what, I don't have an initial preference at this stage, and it may be that they want to do further research. In the insurance market, we find, because it's a very commoditized market, that people will say, I typically just choose on the basis of price. So I don't have an initial preference and I need to know when I do some research to find out about price. So one of the findings from the sportsbook market is that we have a huge proportion, almost 75% of the market have an initial preference, and that's much smaller sample set who don't have an initial preference. We can see that they're basically just saying that they would choose a company based on the best offer, and that's the main thing. However, I have it highlighted in yellow because that is a small sample size, so there's a hygiene factor there, so it is a warning on the sample size. However, proportionately, the trend is interesting over 2 periods of time, because proportionately we're still seeing that the main element which is driving non-initial preference is the best company with best offer. Okay, so final preference. And so the idea being that the person goes and has a look around after initial preference, it gets closer to them actually placing a bet, but they decided they're going to have a look around to look at different types of betting providers that are available to them and to choose one on that basis. So they go online, they follow that customer journey, digital journey in terms of discovery, looking for the different options that are available to them. They're looking at marketing options, they're looking at different types of websites, they're looking at odds, they're looking at different things like that. And so after they have done that, they make a decision, maybe having looked at a couple of different providers. It may be that they are already a customer with 2 to 3 different sportsbook providers, or it may be that they typically only have one and they go to that one all the time. But what we want to look at is we want to look at how attractive all the different providers are within the same period of time for those active bettors. And so what we can see is that William Hill are seeing a drop in terms of the final preference. So while initial preference, which is driven by brand awareness and brand halo, they say, you know, there's an increasing amount of people who'd say, I'd go with William Hill. But after they go online and they have a look around at the different types of options that are available to them, there's actually a decreasing amount who actually would choose them as a final preference. However, Paddy Power are continuing that initial preference increase and then final preference increase. So the journey for them, as they move further, people move further down that funnel, they're continuing their success. They're continuing to maximize and to steal those customers from other people. And Ladbrokes, we're seeing a slight drop. And so I want to look specifically at that Ladbrokes drop. And then we've also got Betfair doing, we've got an increase here as well. Now it is interesting and it's worth bearing in mind the news that has been around in terms of what's happening with Paddy Power and Betfair in terms of the merger and how that would potentially impact things. So there is a halo element in terms of news, and we can look into that within this particular program, but it's not within the scope of what I want to cover this morning. So that may be one of the elements which is interesting in terms of what is driving that final preference for Paddy Power and Betfair. So how do we capture the information that we capture within this particular stage of the discovery and this idea of initial preference through to final preference? It's important for me just to explain it very quickly so that everybody can see where the numbers are coming from and you can understand how we are capturing the data and the insights from this particular stage of the journey. So we start off by inviting 2,400 in market, or in this case active sports bettors, into a study. So we do that on an annual basis. So on a monthly basis we invite 200. So there's a big screening process, and we're reducing and removing an awful lot of the noise within the marketplace, and we're really taking those regular bettors rather than the casual bettors. We start off by asking them, thinking of the brands in the marketplace who are providing, you know, sports betting, who can you think of? Who are the sportsbook providers that you can think of? Top of mind, unprompted brand awareness. We then ask them a couple of pre-questions about initial preference and propensity and what they think of the different brands, and then we go for passive measurement. So the key element though is that there's no research effect at the pre-task questions. It's very much a top of mind element, and we are led by them in terms of what they have to say. The passive measurement is a blank screen study, and what we do is we literally give them a blank screen with a URL box where they start off looking for a sports betting provider that they're going to place a bet with. So we give them a very specific task. Please find a sports betting provider to place a bet with. And then we give them a period of time where they go online and they search for a sports betting provider. We record absolutely everything that they do online. So we get the keywords, we get the click streams, we get the multiple journeys, we get, so if they move from one site to another site, and we're capturing all of the different passive elements of their journey as they're moving through discovering different types of sportsbook providers. After they have conducted that and they completed that, we then bring them back into the shortlisted stage. And so the shortlisted stage is really around looking for a repertoire of brands. So the idea being that now that you've completed the research that you've done online, who would you consider as someone who you'd potentially place a bet with? And so this is a multiple choice question, so there are multiple different brands that you can choose from. And from the shortlist stage, we then ask them, why did you shortlist these particular brands? And then from the shortlist to the final preference stage, we have the, okay, now one final brand from your shortlist, who would you choose? And the reasons why. So it really is a funnel as they're moving through the journey, where we have the pre-perceptions before they do any research, Then they do the research, and then after the research we find out, okay, what did they find out? What is driving them from one place to another? And then ultimately we measure the distance between initial preference and final preference, which tells us what's happening within the actual journey. So that is the methodology that's involved. This is how it's represented within the funnel. And now I'm going to start talking again about these 4 brands and the insights that we have from these particular fieldwork dates that we ran and the studies that we have from our more recent research. So at the top level, we have unprompted brand recall. And so unprompted brand recall is literally top of mind. Please tell us what brands you can think of in the sports betting market. And so across all of the different brands, we can see that Betfair is coming out at the lowest, and followed by Paddy Power, slightly higher than that. The next step is the visited score, and that's the proportion of people who actually visit the sportsbook provider's website. And so this is an actual score driven by that passive measurement that we were doing earlier on. And so straight away, if we look at Betfair again, we can see what's interesting is that the visited score is just 13%. So we're going from 26 to 13, the proportion of people who are visiting the site. And then the shortlisted score is the proportion of people who would shortlist that provider, considering all the different providers that they may have learnt about on that journey. And so looking at the different brands, the one that stands out is the Paddy Power recall is 43%, yet 48% are shortlisting them. And then on the left-hand side, we have Ladbrokes and William Hill, where their recall score is actually higher than their shortlisted score, whereas Paddy Power and Betfair, it's in reverse. So the idea being that in Paddy Power and Betfair, somewhere along the journey, we have people who didn't think of Paddy Power at the beginning, who would now start considering them as a repertoire brand, and the journey ultimately affected that, because that is the stimulus which was in between initial preference and final preference, which is the only possibility to have affected it. So, because they're sitting at home, they're conducting this research on their own devices rather than in a laboratory. This is real-world research. So, what I'd like to look at then is what is driving these different scores, and why is it that some brands are seeing that their recall score is higher than their shortlisted score. And then that element in terms of final preference I've explained, and that is really the idea that from shortlisted, who would you choose as your final preference? One of the other things that we're going to look at a little bit later on is what we call the lost opportunity score, and the lost opportunity score is the conversion ratio from shortlist to final preference. So the idea being, who is converting the best from the repertoire and being within the bucket of brands that are considered to actually being the brand that is chosen. Okay, so that's the brand funnel. That's how we look at the journey, and that's how we measure the journey. I'm going to get straight into the final preference figures, and I'm going to look at reasons for final preference from February through to December, and I'm going to look at Ladbrokes specifically. Why are they dropping in terms of their final preference, which we saw earlier on? There's something going on with Ladbrokes in terms of their initial preference scores are dropping and their final preference scores are dropping. Across the 2 different periods, so this is total sample set, so we're looking at a sample of 400 split 200, 200, I can see that there is a change, or there is a significant difference between February and December when it comes to I trust this company being an important metric. Most of the others are in and around non-statistically significant in terms of margin of error, but this one is statistically significant. I trust this company because we've got a plus score of 10%. When I look at those who chose I trust this company specifically as one of the reasons they chose a brand at final preference, so I trust this company in February is 100%. I've created that as a segment. And I look at the brands that they have chosen, and I've looked at it across the 2 different periods of time. I can see that Ladbrokes, in terms of the people who chose Ladbrokes, the reasons why I trust this company was one of the reasons why I choose them as final preference, has increased by 9%. For William Hill, it's down by 4%. By Paddy Power, it's up by 9%. And for Betfair, it's up by 3%. Okay, so that's very interesting. Brand trust is very, very important. Ladbrokes are doing well on brand trust. Paddy Power also doing well on brand trust. Paddy Power increasing at initial preference and also increasing at final preference, but Ladbrokes are not. So there's something going on, so something really interesting. So while both of them are doing well in terms of the brand trust element, we talked about lost opportunity. The proportion of people who choose a brand at final preference, having chosen them within their repertoire at the shortlist stage. And so we can see that the brand that's doing the poorest in terms of converting from shortlist to final preference is actually Ladbrokes at minus now. There isn't a massive difference between them, but indicatively it is Ladbrokes whose scores are all going in one particular direction. And so I really want to look into this. I want to understand what's going on. So if I look at those who shortlisted Ladbrokes, if I look at those who shortlisted Ladbrokes and I create them as a segment, I can see who they chose as their final preference. So Ladbrokes shortlisted 100%. And so we can see essentially where the different people are pushing their votes at the final preference. So of those who shortlisted Ladbrokes, 26% of them went on to choose Ladbrokes at their final preference. But we can see that William Hill, Paddy Power and Bet365 are the ones who are picking up, and also Betfair are picking up the rest of Ladbrokes customers. So we can see where different people are going to. And so what's interesting then is we can start looking at, of those who chose Ladbrokes as the final preference from shortlist to final preference choose Ladbrokes, what are the reasons why, in comparison to shortlist Ladbrokes final preference William Hill, or shortlist Ladbrokes final preference Paddy Power. And we can start to understand how are these people different and what is it that is driving them to choose somebody else other than Ladbrokes at the final preference. And that's what I've done here. And so what I'm looking at here is those who chose Ladbrokes at shortlist but chose William Hill at final preference, those who chose Paddy Power at shortlist and chose Ladbrokes at shortlist and chose Paddy Power at final preference. So trust we mentioned was really important. Ladbrokes are doing well in terms of trust. But the people who are choosing Paddy Power are looking for trust plus. They're looking for something more. And so what we can see between the two, there's a difference between those who are choosing William Hill, having shortlisted Ladbrokes, and a difference to those who choose Paddy Power, having shortlisted Ladbrokes. And ultimately, the website is having a massive impact for those who are choosing Paddy Power. And trust is a key element in terms of reasons why they're choosing William Hill. So there's a significance there, difference there in terms I've used them before, and I trust this company. Paddy Power, we saw that 9% increase, so they are gaining ground on that trust. But Paddy Power are offering something slightly extra. They're giving plenty of options to choose from. The website helped me to find options quickly. The betting options were easy to understand, and they had the best odds and offers for my needs. And then the one that really stands out for me is their website was visually appealing. So that creates an interesting idea in our mind in terms of measuring the journey. Now, taking methodologies out of the equation, because the consumer doesn't think about it from a methodology point of view, the consumer just does it the way that they do it. We use methodologies to try and understand their journeys. So what we're looking at here is an end-to-end. So if the website is a key element in terms of driving what it is that's driving their final preference, we need to look into those elements to understand that. And so that's what I want to do. That's the next step. I want to look at what is it that Paddy Power are doing that Ladbrokes are not doing, which is driving final preference. And then how is that actually affecting ultimately all the way through to placing a bet and registering? Would the person place a bet and register with Paddy Power? Are Paddy Power keeping it going? So right now at the moment we can see that the marketing stage they're doing well, discovery. We can see that they're definitely doing something well in terms of initial engagement when they go to the actual website, but we're still in the shopping stage. We're still in discover to consider. How about the act? Are Paddy Power delivering on that? So just one other thing. So this is within a particular part of the journey that we measure lots of other different types of things, and I just wanted to give you a flavor of the different types of things that we can measure, because these are ultimately elements that we can segment by as well. So we look at the different sports that these people place bets on regularly. We also look at their switching propensity. So I currently use one sports betting provider, or they use multiple. I use more than one sports betting provider and switch between them. So we're seeing almost a 50-50 split there. We also look at the average bet. So when they're placing a bet, how much do they place in each average bet? And so we can segment, or we can group, or we can look at means in terms of the average amount that's spent, and we could do that by the 4 different groups here who actually chose William Hill, Paddy Power, Betfair and Ladbrokes. And so we can establish those who are moving to Paddy Power, how valuable are they? How much money are they looking to spend? And we can also look at what are they spending wise, and we can also look at, are they promiscuous? Are they moving around? Do we expect that they have loads of other accounts and they're just going to jump around? And we can also look at frequency of bet. So I thought that that was just an interesting element to show how we can add extra flavor too. And so these are the actual scores from this particular run of data from February. So back to this element. We've talked about the discover and the consider. Now I'd like to talk about the act. The person has come to your website. Well, I'd like to talk about the consider and the act. The person has come to your website. The first thing that they have is this initial engagement in terms of the aesthetics of the website, the look and feel, the design, the propositions that you have from a marketing point of view, and they're taking a very quick decision in terms of what they think of you as a brand based on your website, and that is initial engagement. And introducing options is essentially they are looking for all of the different types of events that are available to them and all the different types of sports that are available to them in terms of making a bet. So that is the very quick, I'm looking for a particular type of element that I can place a bet on. How easy is it to find it? Facilitating decisions, we're starting to move into more specific stuff in terms of looking for a bet and how we support them when they're doing that. So the idea being, are we communicating that they're a brand that they can trust? Are we communicating that their money is safe? And the different elements in terms of what they should do should they meet a problem. Channel selection is if they're on the mobile or if they're on a desktop, the channel through which they're actually placing the bet. How are we supporting that and how are we making them feel good in terms of security, but also actually attracting them to based on the different types of user design. So we all know that mobile is the most important thing in terms of being led in the sportsbook market. The sportsbook brands have gone mobile first. So that's obviously going to cause a shift in terms of desktop to mobile, where we've got a wide breadth of events that we're trying to communicate and depth in terms of all the different types of events and when they're upcoming. And so how do we support them in the channel considering the device that they're on? Adding a bet is very specifically the betting slip, and then registration is if they wanted to register that application form and how they're going through it. The adding the bet and the registration is what is part of that act stage, and the first four are part of the consider stage. We have the four different brands on screen that we have been looking at from the previous element in terms of attraction, and now I'd like to specifically look at the introducing options stage, which will also include some elements in terms of the initial engagement stage. And so I can see there that the brands that are low, I can see that Ladbrokes are low here, and I can see that Betfair are low here, and I'd like to know why, and I'd like to know how this marries up to my findings already in terms of discovery and attraction. So within introducing options, what we measure is a learning about event options and learning about the betting options. And so I can see straight away that the Ladbrokes scores here are lower, and they're lower than Paddy Power's, who are the strongest, most definitely in terms about the learning the event options. So these are the category levels underneath the stage score introducing options. I can drill down further into learn about event options to find out exactly what's going on and the reason why Ladbrokes scores are lower. And so when I click into learn about event options, it then brings me to the subcategory stage, and the subcategory stage shows me a number of different factors. It shows me scores from people who have actually tried to complete the journey on the website, and so how effective were they able to complete it, how long did it take them to do it, how satisfied were they, how confident did they feel that they actually were able to get to the answer that they were looking for. And then we have this element in terms of best practice features and functions, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But so the key element here is that I can see that Ladbrokes' effectiveness is a lot lower, and so Ladbrokes are really underscoring here in comparison to their competitors. So what is it that's driving these scores, and could these scores actually ultimately be what's leading to the finding that I found earlier on in terms of the reasons why they're choosing one over another? So I can see that Ladbrokes' confidence is high, so that's okay. But when I look at the people who completed the task, I start seeing that they actually encountered quite a few problems when they were completing the task. So they thought finding where to start looking was not easy. 15% thought the design, color, and text made it more difficult. 10% thought it took a long time to find the information, and 10% found the navigation hard to follow. Okay, so there's definitely something coming out here in terms of the look and feel. So do we have any verbatims from the people who are completing the task at the time? Again, in market bettors, it was far too cluttered and very distracting, too much information, too cluttered, and the site looked confusing. Okay, that's very interesting. So how are we capturing this particular part of the data? Because now we're on a slightly different part of the journey now. And so I'm just going to give you a snapshot of the data methodology so that you can get an understanding of the components that make up how I'm getting the scores that I just showed you. So the first element is we've talked about tasks, so we're doing tasks. What we're doing is we're sending consumers to the Ladbrokes site. So we're sending between 20 and 50 punters who are in market, as in they have active bettors, and we're asking them to complete specific tasks on the Ladbrokes site. So that is up to 5 to 6 tasks, dependent on the industry. And so we are doing that for each of the different brands that are in the study. So each individual brand will get their own set of punters, and no punter will conduct research on more than one site. What we're looking for when we're asking them to do the tasks is to essentially effectiveness. We're looking at success rates, efficiencies, and pathways through the site. We're also asking them what their satisfaction was with the task that they just tried to complete, their expectations before they complete the task, and their opinions, open-ended, and that's where we start getting the voice of the customer, or the voice of the punter in this particular case. We put different elements up in front of them, like the homepage, and we ask them to audit it on a 10-point scale across a number of different types of metrics. So for example, we're trying to measure clutter, we're trying to measure visual design, that it was easy to find where to start looking, or the starting point was clear, or we're also measuring things like brand trust and privacy and security. And then finally, the best practice audit. So this is the first time that I have mentioned the best practice audit to you, but it is actually a fundamental part of what makes global reviews global reviews. So the best practice audit, essentially when global reviews started in 2000, we started with the best practice audit. And essentially what this is a features and functions review of each of the individual sites that are part of this study. And so our best practice audit is made up of between 450 and 500 individual different criteria which are measured against the website journey. And those different criteria have different weightings because at different steps in the journey, different features and functions have different importance. And so we weight those different features and functions, and we measure and benchmark all of the different providers in terms of how they are scoring for providing these different features and functions. The best practice audit criteria itself is built out of an annual study that we do within market or regular bettors, where we establish the importance of different types of features and functions as they're moving through the journey. So for example, if we were to put a chat feature in the deposit page in a sportsbook brand, that would be different to placing a chat on the registration page. And we may actually find that by placing chat on the sportsbook deposit page that we increase the proportion to which people are betting. And so obviously we're increasing our revenue. So we bring all these scores together from the 4 different data streams that are making up this particular part of the journey, and that's how we create the final results. So that's why you're seeing 4 different levels when I showed you the scores earlier on when we were looking into learning about event options. So we have the consider phase, we've talked about that a lot. We've got introducing options, we've talked about that. Understanding fees and charges, or learning about the betting events, and then we've got the subcategory underneath that, which is made up of the task that they tried to complete, their audit of it, their opinions and attitude, and then the features and functions best practice audit. So it really is a very robust methodology. Okay, so back to the findings and Ladbrokes. So what was it that was driving those lower scores from Ladbrokes? So the task at this particular stage in the introducing options is to find the page listing all events currently available to bet in play. And so it's not on the homepage. You're not allowed to find them on the homepage. So in terms of the statement, the page is uncluttered, allowing me to find information easily, customers disagreed with it. In fact, customers disagreed with this statement more for Ladbrokes than they did for the other 3 brands that I've already looked at in terms of the attraction and discover part of the journey. So it seems that from a design point of view and an aesthetics point of view, there is an issue here for Ladbrokes. Okay, let's have a look at some more verbatims. Looked a little busy, nothing here that said the company could be trusted, so many options that sometimes it is overwhelming. Okay, so that's interesting. What else can we learn? So what we can see, another element that comes out is this issue with regards to finding the starting point is difficult for customers. And the clutter is obviously another thing which came out in terms of the verbatim. So the navigation really is down to two elements. One is down to the actual signposting, and then the other one is down to the actual architecture itself. So a PET theory, if you're familiar with that, and then on the other side, usability theory. So what we have for the Ladbrokes side is essentially that their navigation across the top, they have no navigation down the left-hand side, and the navigation across the top isn't really broken down in terms of the different types of things that a person might want to do when they're moving to the site. Essentially, everything is grouped together. So you've got many competing signposts and images and calls to action through color, and it could be distractive and it looks unorganized. So essentially, this no section for universal navigation down the left-hand side or anywhere within the page seems to be causing some level of problems in terms of people being able to find what they're looking for quickly. And so when we look at the actual click stream, we can see that from people who are trying to complete the task, and then we can also see that the average amount of time that it took people to complete the task for Ladbrokes is higher, marginally so, but is higher for Ladbrokes than it is for Paddy Power. Okay, so let's look at Paddy Power and what they're doing and why people are finding it faster on Paddy Power. So they scored the highest in terms of effectiveness in locating events. The task is exactly the same on Paddy Power. 62% of those who are completing the task clicked on the quick links on the left-hand side because that's where the in-play betting is. That brought them then to a different page in terms of the in-play betting, and from there they were able to find the results that they were looking for. So from the home page, they found in-play link very quickly to arrive to the all events information. So this quick links navigation on the left-hand side, and the architecture of it, the fact that it is there, it exists, and it's in a slightly different place. And then secondly, the signposting is completely different. It stands out because it's green and it's been walled off. The website itself has 3 columns of structure, so the functionality in the navigation menu, events and promotions, so it can quickly understand the different elements that are available to me on the home page. We've got minimal color tones, so it's easy to find the information, and the heading of tables and sections are clear to identify the contents. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concepts of the law of similarity, and so I've just pulled out some very quick examples there in terms of a demonstration of how it works, but the idea being that how we group things together tells people about information that they're looking for, because people don't read pages, they scan pages. So the idea being that if I have a line of dots that are a different color, like black here for example, and I do that multiple times, that tells me that that black information is all the same, even though it's in different parts of the site. It's a grouping of that information together. So the idea being that use of similarity or dissimilarity is a quick and clear way for customers to understand where relevant information is for stuff that they're trying to conduct and complete quickly. And that's what Paddy Power are doing very well here on this site, and that's where Ladbrokes are losing out on the previous page that I showed you in terms of where their universal navigation is. And even though it's at the top, people are still finding it difficult to get there. But even more so, it's just the page looks cluttered because everything is looking flat, everything looks the same. There's no prominence given to certain different elements other than the in-play that's on the home page, but we weren't looking for in-play on the home page. I'm taking you to Australia now, and we're looking at CrownBet, and so again a very good performer in terms of exactly the same task. 90% task success rate, 85 didn't encounter problem. Key navigation menu again is on the left-hand side, and what they're doing is the use of icons in terms of communicating key information, and they have this section headings are clear, and then we also have this 3-column element as well. So you've got feeding forward of information, but then also people know where they are within the site quickly and are able to get over and back within a subtree menu because they can quickly use the navigation piece on the left. Insurance is another good example of an industry where they have a lot of different types of products and they're trying to communicate a lot of different types of things about their products. And so you'll see that, or telecommunications, where they're looking at different types of handsets. The navigation elements that they have on those sites are very powerful in terms of getting a breadth of data, information, and a depth of data at the same time. Okay, moving back to the journey again, and this is the last piece that I'm going to go through today because we're finishing up in about 6 minutes. I'd like to look at the adding a bet stage. And I'd like to look here at Betfair and look at their scores in comparison to some of the other providers. And so why are Betfair scores here lower? And so we can see if we look at the two top levels, bet slip and bet slip support, just underneath adding a bet, we can see that Betfair are scoring lower for the bet slip support. And if I look at the different verbatims that are coming out for that, I can see that it's not at all easy to add the correct specified bet to the site, very difficult indeed, and I didn't know how to do it. So they're scoring lower, and then over on the right hand side for the different types of bet slip support features and functions elements that we audit, we can see also that they are not scoring at all and they're doing quite poor on that. Okay. This is at the beginning of every individual study, we look at the different elements that are important to people when they're looking to choose a sportsbook provider. And so what you've got in front of you is a 10-point scale, mean score, different features and functions to people when they're looking for a sportsbook provider. And essentially I pulled this up because the different types of things that are coming out as being really important is information that's easy to understand, easy to navigate, and then support elements in terms of if I do get into trouble, I can quickly find where to go in terms of getting support and help for my answers. So that's the reason why I have that there, because what I want to talk about now is the concept that, okay, all right, there are problems in terms of placing a bet. And in this particular case, we're looking at an ACA. We're looking at an accumulator bet, and that was the task that people had to complete. But people had problems with it, and if people have problems with it, that's fine. We can look at that at a navigational point of view. But what I am interested in at this particular point is what people are going to do if they have a problem, what they're going to do next, and how are we supporting them. And this is where Betfair essentially are falling down. So at the moment, if I'm in the ACA page and I'm looking to place that bet, the help link at the top of the page is universal help. I click on that, it brings me to another page. And then if I want to actually get through to starting a chat, which is what people say that they want, I have to click again on Contact Us. So I've got maybe 2 to 3 different steps in order to being able to get support for the task that I'm literally trying to conduct right now. So this is the reason why we're seeing the verbatims that we're getting on screen. I couldn't find anywhere to suggest it was not for individual bets, struggled to find what I was looking for, screen very busy. So 48% didn't encounter a problem, a lot of people encountered problems, 29% said that there was no instructions or help to assist them through the process, 5.6 out of 10 satisfaction with the actual task. Let's look at William Hill very quickly, top performer here and what they're doing. So they have the help at the top of the page, but then within the actual betting element as well, we have the question mark there that I can click on, which pulls up a help pop-up window to immediately link to live chat and calls to get the solutions quickly. It's immediate. There's no loads of clicking. If I look at another example from Australia, this is LuxBet. So they provide a prominent help link to support customers to bet. It's at the top of the page, prominently located, and immediately displays live chat and telephone options for quick solutions. And so they also have it there as well within the bet slip window where they have an info link to open to FAQs. A completely different industry. Some sportsbook brands we find are interested in what other industries are doing when it comes to supporting customers in the journey, that digital journey. Some of them aren't, but I wanted to give you 2 examples from different industries of how support is being managed in terms of a message customer center and how different ways in which customers can access it. A good example that I pulled forward that I thought that I'd share is NAB Bank, which is a bank in Australia, and so the different ways in which they structure their features and their frequently asked questions is very interesting. Contextual, linkable from anywhere in the site that you may actually want to have those different types of questions, and then obviously they have that best practice piece at the bottom for FAQs. How useful was this for you? And people who search by this also went to this particular type of frequently asked questions. So loads of different examples there why NAB is good. So then other than that, I wanted to quickly look at Vodafone and what they're doing. And so in Vodafone, there is, again, they're using icons, which is really strong as a quick way of being able to identify different types of places to get the information or different types of queries that you might have. And so they have a very, very strong help and support, central area, accessible from everywhere. So very regularly we come across brands where you can find that the contact us pages or the help and support for two elements are in two different places of the site, where really everything should be centralized and people should be able to get to a place where they can get answers to absolutely everything, and that's where we're moving to. And so if you wanted to see best practice examples of that, you start looking at people like Tesco Bank, who are creating a hybrid community system which exists both on the public-facing side of the site but also behind the wall of the login page, so that the community members are actually adding to the responses or questions that people have, and so that there is this collaborative community involved, but they're also using that as an acquisition piece, not just as a retention piece to service clients. And that's the key element in terms of self-service and discoverability, and where we're going to in terms of what customers are looking for, or certainly in terms of what customers are going to expect from a support point of view. So one of the things then that Vodafone do as well is they do have this e-forum as well, so that the people are actually commenting on each other's questions and helping each other out. So the reason why all of this is important, so it's a question that we ask everybody in the study. So the sample size here, we're talking about 300 to 350 people, active bettors. What would they do if they encountered a problem on the website? 26% would look for frequently asked questions, 25% would look for a callback feature or a web chat feature. And if you don't have it, and we're at the acquisition stage and they're looking for a different type of a provider, they're just going to leave. So it's you know, it's really, really important, because 20% say that they'd look for another provider if they couldn't find what they were looking for. And it's going to be worse on mobile than it's going to be worse on desktop, because people have less time and they want to move around quickly. And so what are different people doing in terms of mobile, and good examples from around the world from other industries in terms of how we're supporting the journey for customers as they're moving through that mobile journey. So I just pull out some very, very quick examples for you. So reinforcement of security issues to allay main concerns. Origin is a good example in this area in terms of the sign-up page. We've got Energy Australia is a very good example of this widget that rolls out onto the left-hand side, displays all the different types of contact information that's available, and it's hierarchical. So if you're scared about the idea that web chat and how do you support it, it's a big investment and all that type of stuff, I mean, you can hierarchically choose how you actually want to promote the different types of channels that you're pushing forward. That's one element. But the other element is that web chat, one person can handle up to 2 to 3, maybe even 5 different conversations at once. If it's a call center, one person can only handle one call at a time. So for the economies of it, from that point of view, there's lots of reasons why web chat's a good idea. ANZ Bank, another very good example in terms of what they're doing, and one of the things is the Learn More button, clear and clean information without taking the customer away from the page. Here's my final slide, and we've come towards the end of the session, and I'll deal with questions at the end. So at the very beginning of this journey that we were talking about, the beginning of the website to the end of the website, so I'm really talking about the sales experience now, the digital sales experience. We ask people, how likely are you to choose this particular brand of which they're about to do research on? So 5.7 mean score on a 10-point scale say that they would choose Ladbrokes. Paddy Power 6, William Hill 5.9, Betfair 5.3. And so this is really going to be driven around their perceptions of the brand before they've come to the actual website, and any legacy stuff in terms of previous experience or what other people have told them about the particular brand. At the very end of the journey, having completed 5 tasks and tested the site for a number of different types of elements and really had a good look at the site in terms of what's there, what's available, how it's being supported, the navigation, the trust, the promotion, we can see the scores after when they've gotten to the end of the journey. And essentially that is the impact of UX and CX. So from one, which is more perception-based, to the actual on the journey, in the sales funnel, the digital journey, what is the actual impact of UX, CX? Afterwards, we can see that Paddy Power are dropping. We can see that Ladbrokes are increasing. So from that point of view, I suppose if Ladbrokes aren't getting people onto the site, the impact of CX and UX is kind of negligible anyway, because marketing has to work with digital journey, UX and customer experience people. It has to be holistic, and it can't be siloed based, because that's not the way that the customer thinks or works. The customer does the journey for themselves. And so really marketing, CX and UX have to work hand in hand in order for us to get the customer all the way through from the discover through to the actual act stage. And so that's the key element here. In terms of the William Hill score, it's negligible. It's a 0.1 change in terms of mean scores, so I would say that it's stable. And we can also see that Betfair scores have increased as well. So That's the journey. That's the different elements, and so the key point on this last slide is that different providers are scoring differently in terms of the different stages, and no one provider is winning at every stage. So everybody can learn from somebody else, and if you want to go outside your industry and see what they're doing in other industries, there's lots of examples there. Just in terms of who we are, and I'm not going to go into this in any great detail because I don't want to do a sales piece here, but I mentioned 2000 was the year that we were founded. We're working across 25 different industries, including energy, all the different types of insurance, all the different types of financials, and higher education, telecommunications. We're in many, many different industries where there is a considered process to the customer online journey when making a purchase. The methodology that I talked about earlier on the sample sizes, specifically for the task-based one, many of you would be familiar with doing UX testing in a lab with maybe about 15 people. We do it with 50. The reasons why is because it allows us to identify issues that 95% of your customers will experience, and it also gives us an awful lot more voice of the customer to be able to understand what's going on and for them to tell us their experience. So there's three things that we do really well. We provide unique insights to inform digital strategy, and so how we do that is the first piece that I showed you, the marketing piece, is really, it's a full market view of what's going on rather than the sliver of what you're going to see just from your own search engine stuff, keyword stuff on your own brand. You're not seeing what's going on with your competitors, but we see everything and we see the full journey, and so it's a full real world mirror of what's going on. The second thing that we do really well is we provide data and intelligence that leads to optimal online sales effectiveness. And so you can see that. We can diagnose specific problems, why people are dropping out, and we can make recommendations both on what the customers tell us, and also what we're seeing in the journey against then what's happening in other industries or with your competitors in terms of best practice and how they're reducing bounce rates. Then thirdly and finally, we provide expert advice and consultation. So, I mean, on an annual basis, we're collecting and analysing data on over 50,000 in-market consumers. And so I mentioned that we cut out the noise, so that's a very specific sample set. And we're doing that on an annual basis across 500 different companies. So we're measuring the experience, the digital experience of over 500 companies annually. Our best practice recommendations are evidence-based rather than opinion-based, but we do have a team, of which I head up, of people who make recommendations and give expert advice of that journey. And it's evidence-led, but it's also, we are researchers, and we're experts in terms of making recommendations to improve the journey both at a marketing stage and also at a sales stage. And the result of all of this is that we're running the largest syndicated program of marketing and sales effectiveness studies internationally. So please, if you have any questions, my email address is on the right-hand side of the slide if you have any further questions other than what I'm going to cover now. What I've gone through this morning is really just the top layer of what this particular program provides. So it's really over an overview of the industry. If you got on board in terms of being a client within our programs, you get access to all of the data through a live portal so that it's on demand, and you can have access to historical data because we're in each individual industry. We're running programs bi-monthly or monthly, and we have data going back a number of years. We also will work with you in terms of an optimization program, and so what happens is my team or our team will meet with you and look at the results and make recommendations, find out what's going on for you in terms of what you're developing, have a look at the data, have a look at what's happening around the world, and make recommendations before you go into development so that you don't have the pain of having to tweak things afterwards. Or we also audit things regularly for people after they've developed it, but the best way to work with us is to work with us before you do any work. And then also there's advisory hours for other elements which are essential, more like agile research, I suppose. So please, if you want to get in touch with us to talk to us about the 2016 program. Thank you very much for your time. I'm just going to go offline just for a second so that I can have a look at any of the questions, and I'll be back. I'll answer those questions and then we'll wrap up. Okay, great. I've received a really good question. It's actually broken into two parts. So the first one is to share insights in terms of mobile journey versus desktop journey. So at the moment, in field, our mobile study is in field at the moment. So literally we're asking people specifically to conduct their research on their mobile device. Similar methodology and similar tasks, but it is very device specific. The reason why we do that is essentially the two different things that we've talked about. The first one being marketing. Let's talk about the second one first, which is about the sales journey, the websites. It's really about optimizing your channel to be the best that it possibly can be. So it's like training to get ready for the race. So optimization of performance. And then the first piece about the marketing piece is about the tools to win on the day. So we do a device specific methodology in terms of looking at the different types of devices. And so the mobile research I haven't included in this particular study, but we will be doing a mobile webinar very shortly. I would imagine that it will be happening next month. So in terms of the different types of insights and stuff that we can share on mobile, I suppose I've looked at these results for the last number of years, and what is interesting is that if you have a good desktop journey doesn't necessarily mean that you have a good mobile journey. What I mean by that is, having looked at the results of the different types of providers, there is a gap. Some are providing good desktop journeys, poor mobile journeys, and we do go into the reasons why that is the case. So that there's lots of different things in terms of mobile and insights, but obviously from a design point of view there are going to be massive implications in terms of people being able to learn about event options, find what they're looking for, add stuff to the betting slip, and then also be able to get all of the background stuff in terms of search and support. So that takes me to the second piece, the second question, which was around, can I talk about search? And so what I'll do is I will make sure that we include a component in the webinar around search, but essentially one of the key, just to give you a very, very top level finding, one of the key questions we get asked regularly is, should there be a search function, or does the burger bar and elements of going through FAQs and stuff like that, is that enough, A to Zs? And ultimately the answer is both. That customers who have access to both is the best way forward, for the simple reason that different customers search in different ways. But the only other thing though is that if you do supply and provide a search functionality, it needs to work, because the idea being that people need to be able to find what they're searching for pretty quickly because of the brilliant facility that exists, which is the search bar. So that is something which is covered in our features and functions audit that we do measure, so that we actually specifically cover that if you put something into search, does it come up within the first page results, and I can go into more depth on that specifically in terms of search. So hopefully that, I know it probably doesn't give you a full answer, but we definitely do have loads of insights in that area, and please do come back and we'll cover all of that in the next session, which will most likely be at the beginning of May. Stay tuned, as they say, and you'll see the dates coming out, and we can look at different types of results. I think it may be interesting actually if we continue the story from here and we look at the 4 brands again, maybe in terms of mobile journey, or maybe we look at slightly different brands. So thank you again for your time, and you have my email address if anybody has any questions, or there's also the email address to which you received an invitation to this particular session. I hope you found it useful and interesting, and I hope to see you again maybe in another webinar. So thank you very much.